But as we turn our attention to our first speaker, let me say that I've had a bit of a sneak preview as to what you've got coming, and you are in for a real treat. Cherron Inko-Tariah is a former civil servant. She's also the author of the most fantastic book, nay, incredible book. It's an incredibly powerful book. It's a book that talks about the incredible power of staff networks. And if you haven't, and believe you me, I happen to know Cherron relatively well, and she won't thank me for this, but I don't care. I'm going to mention her book right now. It's The Incredible Power of Staff Networks. I've been involved personally in networks for coming on 24 years. I've purchased and read a number of books on social capital, on staff networks, on employee resource groups. I've read well into double figures. This book is by a distance the best that I have ever read. It's straightforward. It gets straight to the heart of the matter. It's overflowing with guidance and insight, so much so that I personally refer to Cherron Inko-Tariah as a visionary. And so this book is now in its 5th year, written long before some of the recent attention to staff networks, quite rightly, given the unprecedented year and the ways in which staff networks can deliver a better organization. Cherron was talking about it nearly half a decade ago. In fact, before that, the book took a while in gestation and she offered it to the world 5 years ago. And so, with her eye on her request, her commission to look at how we can support diversity, realize inclusion, and drive business goals in the workplace, Cherron has prepared and turned her attention to that specific ask, and she is going to share with us now for about 20-25 minutes, leaving space after that for questions and to respond. But she'll use her time with us. Lean in, folks, lean in, listen with real intent. I don't say this lightly, but Cherron Inko-Tariah is an authority on staff networks, and she's been doing it for some time. It's in her DNA. And so as I hand to Cherron, I'm glancing at the screen. We make for a wonderful juxtaposition there, Cherron. It's like we're promoting the American presidential election. You in blue and me in red. As I say,
gosh,
that's not to my affiliation. I'm just saying, it's like we've got the blue states and the red states. It's like we've got the Democrats and the Republicans on the screen.
Oh, but, my days.
Cherron is a dear friend, colleagues. She is someone that I say I've gotten to know over the recent years, and she is incredibly powerful. Please do join me in welcoming Cherron Inko-Tariah, MBE.
Well, good morning, Rob. Good morning, everyone. Rob, thank you so much for that really lovely introduction. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. And yes, I do get a bit, I was like, oh, don't say anything. And yes, you went and said something, but no, thank you so much. So I am grateful. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session today. Huge congratulations to Cherron and Dods team for putting together what I can see is a fantastic lineup of speakers. So I know that you're in for a real treat today. I've heard some of the speakers before, and they are really coming with practical advice and experience. So I know you're going to benefit greatly from today. I'm just going to give an overall picture of what I've seen happening, especially during this year, and a little bit of a nod towards what more networks can do and organizations can do to help networks understand how they can add value, and then some projections for 2021. So that's what I'm going to do, and then we can have a bit of a chat with a Q&A afterwards. So bear with me as I share my screen, because I have pulled together a slide deck for you, and I'm hoping that's there on your screen. Put that in slideshow mode. So obviously, I have to start with what we've seen and what we've experienced this year. It has been a tough year on both fronts. We are still in the midst of a pandemic with COVID-19, but sadly, we saw some terrible things happening across the globe with the murder of George Floyd, with the subsequent protests that happened. But in between all of these things, there have been some rays of sunshine. There's been some rays of real hope where people have been coming together to protest for equality and justice, where people have sacrificially given themselves to support others who are in need of help. Patrick Hutchinson there, for example. And we saw that throughout the pandemic, people were just selflessly supporting their communities in diverse ways. And also I saw employee networks really rise up. I saw some fantastic work of networks in their organizations, just deciding to, hey, let's reach out to our members and make sure they're okay. And all of this is happening before our very eyes. We also saw a bit of a backlash towards, things like unconscious bias training, and in America where the president has banned diversity training, claiming it's divisive. A lot of these things have come. So in all the good stuff that we saw, we also saw some stuff that's trying to dampen it down as well. But networks were still shining through. Despite all of these things, networks were still carrying on supporting their members. And that's really what I want to talk about for the next few minutes. It's about understanding how networks thrive in times of crisis. They do, they really do. They were the first ones to understand that the coronavirus has meant that we have to work differently, but dispersed doesn't mean that we're disconnected. And they were really hot off the mark in terms of getting people together and checking in with them and making sure that they were okay. Networks have a history of helping bring calm during rough times for members. And as I mentioned before, I saw an increase in participation from all networks, but in particular faith and belief, mental health, and carers. And then after the murder of George Floyd, we saw an increase in the number of race networks or networks serving Black and Asian minority ethnic staff, because people just needed a space where they could share, where they could pour out, and networks were providing those spaces. When I spoke to network chairs, they told me they were supporting people feeling anxious around furlough and the lockdown and balancing responsibilities at home while trying to work remotely. Social distancing and the help looking after themselves as well. All of these things are new. They're all new to us, aren't they? And so it was important for people to feel that they weren't isolated. And according to the Institute for Corporate Participation, they found that 37% of their organizations, network leaders were helping monitor emotional well-being of group members. Organizations were looking to networks to help them with that. And also they provided this forum and curated a safe space for identifying needs and raising concerns. So a bit more of that survey I just mentioned about the Institute for Corporate Participation there, where, as you can see, of the organizations they surveyed, 37% were encouraging their leaders of networks to surface the needs and concerns of their groups. For example, older workers, workers with disability, working parents, and so on. And again, just to reinforce that they were asking them to help monitor the emotional well-being of their groups. So this was, showing how organizations were now leaning on networks to help them understand their workforce better during a time of crisis. And because members comprise of the workforce, networks were easy to reach out to them and to really hear what their key concerns were and put them forward to the organization to help iron some of those out, to find some solutions. So it's really beginning to demonstrate how networks are playing an important role. 34% said that they were asking their network leaders to help them keep a varied employee community connected and engaged. And that's what networks have been doing anyway. They work with their members to support them, to keep them engaged, keep them connected. So the fact that organizations were starting to look towards networks to help them do this, I think it's great. You know, it's a shame we had to have a crisis for it to happen, but hey, let's embrace where we are and let's keep moving that forward. Um, so I think there was certainly some insights provided by networks in a way that leaders never expected to receive had it not been for COVID-19, unfortunately. And even a number of network leaders have said to me that, you know, while nobody wanted this, what it has done is actually made them pause and rethink how they work with their members, how they engage with them. So it's also stimulated a discussion about we don't need to do things in the same way we've always done it, which is great. It is always good when we think about different ways of serving our members. So for me, COVID-19 has almost acted like a catalyst for change for networks. I mentioned before that cultural intelligence really came to the fore. You know, the networks provided this input into leadership teams about, you know, return to work implications for specific employee groups. They were able to help with messages, and they were able to use networks to better understand those concerns and fears. Um, you know, the pandemic has revealed the fault lines. You know, it's caused both organizations and networks to rethink and adapt what their purpose is. How can you exploit this particular situation to really think about why are we here again? What are we trying to do? And it's an opportunity to break away from that. We've always done it this way. Let's think differently about how we can really serve our members. And we saw that networks were really amplifying their voice, surfacing needs and concerns of group members who may represent, you know, uh, workers with disabilities, other employee populations, and so on. But in particular, we saw an amplification of voice around the race agenda because of all the things that had happened this year. So that amplification of voice really needs to keep on moving forward, really needs to keep standing out. And of course, then we saw intersectionality really take, you know, center place in conversations. We saw people talking about the intersectional identities that they carry, and how do you spark a dialogue about differences and the impact and so on. It's an opportunity to address root causes, talking about things like privilege and bias, and understanding why it's important to talk about these things as a way of tackling equity issues. So we saw a real change of dynamic in some regards, with networks taking the lead in a number of those conversations. And it was great to see. It was almost like, yes, I've been waiting for this to happen. Obviously not COVID, but I've been waiting for this catalyst of change to happen. And the fact that some networks saw this as an opportunity to seize that and run with it has been really encouraging. So staff networks in action during COVID. Well, here's some examples of what organizations and their networks did. Square, the organization Square, utilized the Slack channel, which I know a lot of organizations do, but they created these virtual water coolers via Google Hangouts, and it remained opened all day so that people could just pop up and say hello and so on. People took breaks together to catch up. They also held this Ask Me Anything sessions with their exec sponsors and senior leaders. So that was their way of making sure that the communication was flowing, that people could, ask them a question, find out information to reassure people, and the networks really helped to do that. FINRA they organized a wellness resource, including mindful sessions, and they did that through their Disability and Wellness ERG, their network called Dawn. Again, simple things, but it really helped with people and their mental health and their well-being. The Whirlpool Women's Network, I really love this. I think this is really sweet. Nearly 1,500 members launched a thank you letter writing campaign, and this network wrote to everyone working in the manufacturing front line across the US. And it was just a letter to say, we appreciate you, we value you, we know you don't know us, but we just wanted to do something to say thank you for doing all you can, for doing what you do. And on the surface, you think, well, it's a bit random writing a letter to a stranger. But when you think about it, imagine receiving something like that. It's nicely done, and it's I just thought that was really endearing, and it was their way of showing their appreciation. ADP, I actually like this idea. They provided their network leaders or business resource group leaders with guidance on leading during challenging times, which included exercises to help promote team dialogue and resources to help families navigate the blending of work and life. So I love that practical way that the people from the top came in and supported those leading the resource groups, which shows me that they understood the important role that they were playing during COVID. The UK Civil Service, I know that a number of the umbrella networks were holding virtual meetings with guest speakers and colleagues, and had support mechanisms in place. So that was great to see on social media that they were doing that. And finally, NASA, the space agency, they were really helping their networks by becoming this social outlet. And they created, designated virtual space for communication and sharing. They holded virtual coffee chats, happy hours, learning opportunities, and so on. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of the different ways in which some networks stepped up to really support not just their members, but the organization at large. And this is us, the National Day for Staff Networks last year. This year, we decided to hold it online, and we had a series of 4 events, and the feedback was overwhelming. People just said that they really just loved touching base with people, just connecting with people, and it's talking about something that they were passionate about, and getting that energy back in their network. So that was great. So glad we did that. So I've given you a quick run through about what some of the things that have happened during COVID-19, and some of the ways in which networks have really stepped up. Let's talk about some of the challenges that still, that some networks still face today. So networks are still expected to be experts in organizational design or HR matters. They are not. They are not experts. They may have some insight, but they are not experts. What they can really articulate very well is the lived experience of their members. They can articulate that, they can share some examples, they can provide perhaps some solutions to some of those things. They could perhaps shape policy, but they're not there to take the lead on policy. So, when we approach networks and we're asking them to share their story, let's listen, let's understand, but it's not then for the network to take forward the solution. It's for them to maybe offer some ideas and contribute, but it's not for them to do, it's for the organization to do. And that's a huge challenge facing networks, particularly those serving Black and Asian minority ethnic staff. That's something that keeps coming up time and time again, that they come to us and say, what should we do? And we're like, well, we don't know, we just know that we're hurting. So let's be mindful that they're not experts in organization design or HR matters. And it's important for networks not only to be seen useful and helpful during a crisis. Why do we only see them in that way? Why aren't we seeing them as a pool of talented people or part of the leadership cohort? There's still an element of them over there. But it's really important to start thinking about what lessons can we learn from our networks during this crisis, so that we can reframe how we look at them going forward. Another challenge is for the topmost senior leadership failing to continue to convey messages of support, empathy, and flexibility, and or fail to create ways for consistent messages from middle managers down to all employees. So it's great that the most senior leadership are messages from the top, but they need to be consistent with that. And they also need to ensure that their middle managers understand their role in really pushing forward those messages as well. It's usually around the middle management band where a lot of network leaders face some turbulence in trying to, deliver what they want to do on the networks. So those messages of support and empathy and flexibility really need to keep coming through time and time again. And network leaders members may feel it necessary to, um, you know, compensate for time taken away from the day job by working longer hours, because they think, well, if I'm doing this stuff for the network, then I need to find time to make up for all the other stuff that I'm not doing. And, we need to really start moving out of this frame of mind where we talk about networks being in this volunteer thing. It is voluntary. It is I understand that there's a volunteer aspect, but if we really value networks, then we have to find a way of ensuring that what networks are doing is part and parcel of their day job. So they do not feel guilty or having to find extra time to do the network business. Yeah. I understand that there's other priorities. I get that, but that doesn't mean to say that the network is less of a priority. I think we need to find a way of incorporating it so that if I'm spending an hour at 3 o'clock on network time, I do not feel guilty or I'm expected to pick up all the other stuff. Yeah, I'll get off my soapbox with that. I do think, what we have seen this year is that networks are stepping up and they can really do some wonderful things. But, if they're feeling guilty and trying to find ways to compensate by working longer hours, that's not right. So those are some of the challenges. I think there's probably a whole heap more, but I just wanted to highlight those ones. And how can we start to see then networks as a driving force? What are the opportunities available to us going forward? Well, it's a fantastic opportunity to continue to tune in to what matters to employees. Yeah, that's really what the crisis taught us. Let's focus in on what's important to employees. What are they concerned about? Yeah, getting that work-life balance right. Dealing with childcare, becoming a automatic teacher for your children, or other caring responsibilities that you may have. How do we make sure that we continue to tune in to what matters? I think it's been clear that networks have been seen as a source of building a community and a strategic partner to the organization. And what's become really apparent is that community and partnership isn't contingent upon physical proximity. We are connecting now. There's, 40 or so of us on a call talking about networks, and we're nowhere near each other. So it shows that it's not around physical proximity. So networks, when you say that, no one comes to our meetings, or we can't get people to come to this site or that site, this is kind of, got rid of that problem. It's easier for people to log on and connect. So how do we keep building on that? And step networks comprise of qualified and passionate people ready to meet goals for the business and society. So how can we weave in the success profiles or core competencies into network leadership? I really think we need to take it up a step, because we've got people doing fantastic work, but when they leave the network, what's left? What can we do to really ensure that the skills and competencies they've demonstrated in the network actually support them in their career going forward, if they choose to? Yeah. So maybe we need to start thinking about some success profiles or core competencies that we're looking for from our network leaders to help them build their capability and, really contribute to their bag of tools, as it were. And whether, networks existed before the pandemic, they were thriving during the pandemic, and no doubt they will stay after the pandemic, because they are committed to continuing teaching about the group's needs, breaking cycles of discrimination, through meaningful interaction, using innovation to create new business ideas and solve problems. So if we recognize that networks are doing all of these things, surely now is the time to invest in this resource. They are really adding value in a number of ways. So surely now is the time to say, okay, we need to do something differently to really show how we support and appreciate our networks. And with that said, some of you may be familiar with on your screen called the value continuum. And it really just shows the different ways in which networks are adding value, whether it's through compassionate conversations, making people feel safe, supporting and representing their members, or really by fostering more creativity and innovation. Because when people feel valued, when their well-being is seen as paramount, then people, their psychological contract is strengthened. They feel that they can make more of a contribution, and so their productivity and creativity is increased. So the value continuum walks networks through about some of the things that they could do to demonstrate how they add value. But what I would like to focus in on for the next few minutes is just the middle bit here, the network value proposition. You may be familiar with the employee value proposition, and it's a take on that. It really is. It's about looking at the balance between rewards, benefits, and so on. And I've broken this up into two. So when we look at the network value proposition and we look at the networks as commercial contributors, how they contribute to the career, the culture, and the benefits. I've put it there in three areas. So when people feel like they belong, they engage more and feel part of the organization. Yeah. So that contributes to the moral case of networks. Networks can influence and help develop policies and procedures and practices that bolster inclusion. And when they foster, when they facilitate those compassionate conversations, it reduces conflict. It reduces potentially the number of grievances. So there's a legal element there. It's about creating an environment where good relations can take place. So that's a legal element right there. There's more retention. KPIs are reached. There's less recruitment. So there's the economic argument there, and they boost the reputation of the organization, and they attract people to the business, creating a more employer of choice rather than the employer of chance. So if we think about how networks are contributing in that way, how they contribute to the career of people, to creating an inclusive culture, to yielding a number of benefits, surely now's the time to think about how do we compensate our networks? Yeah, because they are bolstering the sense of belonging for a group of people who often feel isolated because they are marginalized or they're underrepresented or whatever the case may be. So here's some questions for you to think about. Is the network's activity recognized in the performance appraisal process? What percentage of employees are members of the network? What's the market share? Because if you've got a number of employees, members of networks, then that's telling you something. That's important to understand how people appreciate and value their networks. How many employees participate in network business? So what's the heart share? Is the network's activity recognized as continuing professional development, for example? Do they have core competencies? And what about engagement scores? That, network members versus non-members, the mind share. So when we're looking at the network value proposition, we need to have in place some idea of, how valued the network is. We need to understand, how they're contributing to engagement, how they're contributing to, participation and so on. And really start to think about how without their input, without their contribution, what would the organization look and feel like? Would there be an increase in grievances? Would you find it difficult to retain staff? Would you constantly find the recruitment budget increase because you're constantly having to recruit all the time? We need to start looking at those profit leaks that we often forget about. But I'm suggesting that we do that to really understand how networks foster a sense of belonging in the organization. And here are some critical components for the business to consider. And I saw a great article by Stephen Frost, and so this is taken from that article, and I've just added on a few more bits and pieces to emphasize the point. So any D&I work should link to the strategy of the business. What is the organization trying to do, and how is D&I core to that? And then my question is, how do you involve networks? How do they become a collaborator in that as well? D&I work should be data-led. Which behaviors are getting in the way of greater inclusion? And one way you can find that out is to listen to the lived experiences of those in networks. D&I should infuse governance, how decisions get made. So what are some of those blockages to achieving that representation across the organization? It should be a core part of leadership. Your behavior not outsourced to junior D&I team lacking influence. So look at your networks as a strategic collaborator, because they are across the organization, providing different insights. And D&I should be embedded in systems such as recruitment and procurement to de-bias them, improve their performance, and ensure scalability and sustainability. So those are just some things for the business to consider, as well as thinking about the network value proposition. Think about what else you could do as well to help, drive those business goals around diversity and inclusion. Finally, I did promise some projections for 2021 based on what I've seen across the year thus far. I've really seen that, COVID has encouraged networks to cross boundaries and time zones. They've become more agile and intersectional in their thinking. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. We really are, because there is strength in unity. So I think we're going to see more and more of that happening. Networks have increased their position, and they are starting to connect to metrics. So they're starting to identify what metrics need to be in place so they can show how they are really making a difference, really having that impact. So I think we're going to see more networks looking for data and different ways of measuring their impact. And finally, I think networks are, organizations are looking at networks in a new way, and many will follow Twitter's example and start to compensate members of their resource group leadership team for their extra work. And there's this great quote from the head of inclusion there, which says, this work, the work of networks, is essential to Twitter's success. It is not a side hustle or a volunteer activity. They are the lifeblood of inclusion efforts at Twitter. And I really hope, I really believe that we're going to hear more organizations echoing those sentiments.
Mm.
So one more plug from me, and then we'll open up to Q&A. Wednesday, the 12th of May, 2021, people. It's the 5th anniversary of the National Day for Staff Networks. Now, if this is the first time you are hearing of this, where have you been? It was launched in 2017, and it's the only day that celebrates the inspirational and transformational work of networks in the UK. So it's a great day just to say thank you, to acknowledge and to celebrate how they add value. So put that date in your diaries and look out for adverts across social media. And that's it. That's everything I wanted to say in a nutshell. So yeah, happy to take those questions.
Wow. Great stuff, Cherron Inko-Tariah. Look, I'm going to dive straight into the questions because we've got about 6 minutes. Let's see if we can rattle through some real quick fire questions, Cherron. Are you up for that?
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, let me go straight to this personal one. Colleagues find your energy infectious and unbelievable. How do you keep your energy up?
How do I keep my energy up? Well, see, so let me be clear. I'm not about networks because I think networks are great. So it's not about the networks itself. It's about what networks do for people. Right. And so when I see people, so I've got the sun in my eyes, so forgive me. When I see people start to blossom and start to get that confidence and feel that they are part of a work family, that they feel supported. That's my energy. That's what it's about. So that's
Wow.
why I'm always about networks being effective, because I can see, or I know what happens as a result,
Wow. So
what it does for people. So it's about the people
yeah,
rather than the concept of a network itself. Do you know what I
that's
mean? It's about
really
what it does to people.
maybe that's another session for another time, because that
Ah,
gets to the heart of it, and what sustains you and what keeps you going. So
yeah.
thank you for responding. Next question. It's anonymous, so we don't know who sent it in, but what happens when you can see the need for a network, you want to start a network, but you have a feeling that you're not senior enough. You just haven't got the positional power. What's your advice to those?
Okay, so in the absence of positional power, there is people power. So even if you don't think you've got the position, if you don't think that you're senior enough, just do some groundwork, start to speak to some people, speak to a range of people, and find out whether they believe there's a need for a network.
Yeah.
And that leads to another conversation, which leads to another conversation. So you just have to really think about sharing, being brave enough and saying to a couple of people, look, I'm thinking of doing this.
Right.
And don't feel that you're limited to your organization.
Yeah.
Call me if you're interested. Call me and I can connect you with someone else who started something.
There
So
you go.
don't feel that you have to do it by
There you go.
yourself. So you can reach
Networking.
out.
Right there.
Networking.
Networking. Another question, Cherron. Thank you for that. Thank you. Another question. In today's climate change, it is important that we have these networks available. But how do we help promote these networks when people are not always open to change?
When you say people, that's quite broad.
It
Uh,
is, yeah.
uh,
And it's anonymous. Unfortunately, we can't go back unless the person listening to their question wants to say a bit more.
okay, so right, so in the sense of promoting the network,
Yeah.
number one, if there's more than one network in your organization, do joint promotion. That's what I would say. All the networks come together as a
Yeah.
community
Yeah.
and show how they can support the organization. So do that joint promotion, collaborate. It's not a competition. You're all really trying to achieve the same goal:
Yeah.
equity, fairness, justice, belonging,
Inclusion.
etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say that if you find that there are particular people that don't want to change,
Yeah.
again, find out from other networks whether they experience the same thing,
Yeah.
and then that will you can start to whittle out what's the problem. Is
Yeah.
it your network, or is it a network thing generally, or
Yeah.
is it an inclusion thing? And then so you start to gather you have to become like Columbo and start gathering your evidence to really understand what the blockages are.
Yeah, like Columbo. For those of you too young to know, he was a detective on a TV series. Look it
And
up.
he always had just one more thing, just
Just
one
one more
more
thing.
thing.
Just one more thing. Very insightful. Just a couple more questions, Cherron. And I know you've got so much behind this question to answer, but what are the core you mentioned core competencies in your presentation, and particularly around the leadership of a staff network, but what are the core competencies of a network leader, and how can these be developed?
Okay, so the core competencies will depend on the organization within which you work. All right, so let me be clear about that, because I'm trying to push for organizations to think about how they can develop their network leaders while they're leading the network, but also beyond tenure. So
Yes.
whatever leadership skills you are valuable in the
Yeah.
organization, how can we make sure that network leaders have the opportunity
Yeah.
to learn some of
Life
those?
after their network lead.
Life after the network. So I think it would be unfair for me to say that you need this skill or this skill, because that may not be the currency in your organization.
Yeah.
So I would say whatever the leadership competencies are where you are,
Yeah.
have you really thought about weaving those in to the network leadership cohort? That's the
Brilliant.
challenge.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I
So
know.
I'm not dodging the question, but I think I'm
No.
trying to give you the thinking behind what
Yeah.
I'm saying around
Absolutely.
competency.
No, I think that's clear, really clear. And as you said, people on the call can contact you if they want to know more about that detail.
Sure.
Final question. Oh, I just mentioned to Anonymous, yes, the slides, or at least a version of them, together with a recording of this session, will be available after this, as you've put it, brilliant session. So already some feedback coming in for you there, Cherron. A brilliant
Thank you.
session, according to that colleague. Thank you so much for that comment. A final question from IJ Onyechi. IJ, I hope I've pronounced that name correctly, IJ. IJ Onyechi says, as some organizations are building and creating networks, others are disbanding them, like Deloitte US. What more can be done to highlight the value of staff networks? Oh my goodness, you're speaking to the right person here. Over
Okay, so hi, I think that's IJ from Peabody. Hi, IJ. So firstly, I think there's lessons to be learned from Deloitte in the US. The challenge was that you had a group of people who did not feel that networks were supporting them, even though they have the old boys school network. And I think what we can learn is the importance of networks being aware of who their stakeholders are, of networks really understanding how they need to demonstrate how they are adding value, how they are helping the organization achieve its goals, and so on. The other side of that is, if you're in an organization and you have a group of people who have, let's say, been privileged in their life, being upset about the particular interventions being made to help underrepresented groups, and you do not challenge that, then we have a problem. There's a bit of a Houston, we have a problem, because what is your inclusion strategy saying? And if people are, saying, well, we don't like this and we don't like what you're doing there, you say, well, actually, this is part of our inclusion strategy. This is why we are doing it. We are supporting our networks because they bring value to the business. They help bolster our inclusion culture. They attract people to our organization. They increase well-being and productivity. And I think that's a valuable resource. The fact that you feel slighted or your nose is out of joint is not a good enough reason to shut down an entire network of communities. So I think sometimes organizations have to stand up a little bit and really protect networks, but networks, you need to give them something to protect at the same time. Yeah. So the challenge is for both organizations and networks.
Yeah, we've got the shepherd's crook coming on in this wonderful shape of Cherron telling us. Before you go, Cherron, before you go, thank you so much. Sheila Patel wanted to know, as a previous chair of a staff network for the London Fire Brigade, you may know Sheila. Sheila is saying role models were crucial to her development. What or who is your role model?
Oh my God.
You may have to write that one in, folks.
I'm sorry. My role model comprises of different, it's like a patchwork of a woman. Okay. So there's some, my mum is in there, my gran is in there, Shirley Chisholm is in there, Oprah is in there.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Harriet Tubman.
They're in my patchwork too.
Yeah, so
thank you so much, Cherron. Pick it up on Twitter if you want to. Follow Power of Staff Networks on Twitter, folks. If you want to, she'll answer more there. You've got some wonderful comments coming in about people could listen to you all day, Cherron.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you all very much for those comments.